And she started reading the story without any real preamble, at least if there was, I can't remember, it didn't sink in, because I was bewildered anyway. And she began to read this extraordinary story, or just a very unexpected story, really, of Krishna's Mother Yasoda, the end of her sari tightly wrapped while she churned, milk dripping from her breasts, bangles, tinkling, earrings and breasts shaking, and then there's a baby, and the baby wants, the milk boils over, and the baby wants to be fed, and then she's feeding the baby from her breast, and I was just completely bewildered. And I was sitting with Yamuna, who, was the sort of personification of the original Earth Mother, I would say, with this amazing aura. And, my hairs were standing on end. So always in my mind, I sort of have confused the image of Mother Yasoda with the image of Yamuna telling me this story. So here's what Prabhupada says, this passage that we're just reading now. Mother Yasoda chased Krishna to all corners, trying to capture the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is never approached even by the meditations of great yogis. In other words, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, who is never caught by the yogis and speculators, was playing just like a little child for a great devotee like Mother Yasoda. Mother Yasoda, however, could not easily catch the fast-running child because of her thin waist and heavy body. Still, she tried to follow him as fast as possible. Her hair loosened. The flower in her hair fell to the ground. Although she was tired, she somehow reached her naughty child and captured him. When he was caught, Krishna was almost on the point of crying. He smeared his hands over his eyes, which were anointed with black eye cosmetics. The child saw his mother's face while she stood over him, and his eyes became restless from fear. Mother Yasoda could understand that Krishna was unnecessarily afraid, and for his benefit, she wanted to allay his fears. Being the topmost well-wisher of her child, Mother Yasoda began to think, if this child is too big, I don't know what will happen to him. She then threw away her stick, and in order to punish him, she thought to bind his hands with some ropes. So that's the supreme way to understand the 10th canto of 3, just to read. Prabhupada referred to, there's a story that Prabhupada liked to have the Krishna book read to him. And he said, I didn't write this. Sometimes I found reading the Krishna book, it becomes melodic. You can sing it. It's because Prabhupada was dictating these stories of Krishna in complete ecstasy. What happened was, in the early days of the movement, when Prabhupada first arrived in New York, he was working on the Bhagavad Gita. He had made a version of the Bhagavad Gita already, but that got lost. Once I was in Vrindavan in 1975, wandering down a back street, and a man came out of a building and he saw me. A white-skinned devotee was very rare in Vrindavan at that time. And he called me over with great excitement and said, "Come, I've got something to show you." He knew straight away that I was a disciple of Srila Prabhupada. So he led me inside this beautiful residential building, but it was built like a temple. So that the courtyard, at the far end of the courtyard was the gates into the shrine. And then all around were the residential accommodations going up 3 stories with balconies all around. So he took me up narrow stairs onto the roof, and as he was taking me up, he said, you're Prabhupada. He used to live here in the 1960s or late 50s, early 60s. He lived here, he was my tenant. And he took me up onto the roof and he showed me a little room on the roof. And then he said, and while he was here, he was translating the Bhagavad Gita. And I still have a copy, I still have his copy of Bhagavad Gita. So then he took me downstairs and he produced an old Indian manuscript of the Bhagavad Gita, and in the margins were pencil notes made by Prabhupada. The whole book was filled with notes in the margins. I often wondered what became of that amazing article. So Prabhupada had made a version of the Bhagavad Gita, but it got stolen. So sometimes, we have a setback in life, but there may be some higher plan. So Prabhupada took it like that most of the time. And when he came to the West, he was working on a second version of the Bhagavad Gita, which Prabhupada also referred to as Bhagavad Gita as it is. No compromise, no deviation. The Bhagavad Gita as we have received it through the disciplic succession, and it's very significant, of course, absolutely fundamental to the Krishna consciousness movement that Prabhupada has included at the end of the introduction, the disciplic succession. And he writes, this Bhagavad Gita as it is received through this disciplic succession. So he made no compromise. And sometimes, if you might read a transcript of Prabhupada talking with guests, I know I sometimes used to think, gosh, Prabhupada's so outspoken, he's so kind of merciless to his guests. People come to see him, and he would just smash them. And sometimes even you might hear the recording, the tape recording. And then you might notice there's inflections in Prabhupada's voice that you don't get, when you just read the words. You get the movement. And you think, oh, actually, it wasn't quite as harsh as I thought. Now, there was one particular conversation which was quite well known, where Prabhupada met a cardinal, a French cardinal, Danielu, in Paris. And the cardinal was near the end of his life. He died not long afterwards. He was elderly, extremely respectable leader of the church in France. Of course, the Catholic Church is the established church, so he was very powerful, influential, respected man in France. So Prabhupada met with him, and I had read the transcript in the Back to Godhead, where Prabhupada had basically he challenged him on meat eating, which is it's a sort of well, I can think of a word, but I won't use it here. But it's like it's a walkover, isn't it? If you challenge a Christian on meat eating, what chance have they got? There can be no justification to eat meat if you're serious about loving God. So somehow or another that came up, and Prabhupada just basically he wiped the floor with them, I'm afraid. That's what it read like. And he even came up with the classic thing, yes, but what about you eat potatoes? And when they come to that, then this person's desperate. So it kind of upset me a bit because I was brought up as a Catholic and I had some regard for these. I thought, well, I'm sure he had his problems, this cardinal, but basically, he's after all a man of God. So, but then I saw